Welcome to a new special series on chillTV, The Calm in the Storm. You know, we're going through some very strange times right now with the COVID pandemic, and we thought it was time to address some of the feelings that we're going through here. And we've invited today an expert on this. His name is Kim Self. He's an entrepreneur extraordinaire with Aromatica Fine Teas, and he's also done some grad work at the University of San Diego in counseling psychology. So Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We're maintaining some social distancing here as we need to during this time. Now, I said expert, and I'm sure our audience is wondering, what makes you believe you're an expert on crisis?
Whoa. I don't know that I would invite the kind of hubris that comes with saying I'm an expert on crisis. You got to go through a lot of it to do that. But I will say 40 years of dedicated study to change management and the whole process of change and adaptation, as well as the fact that I've lived through 3 of the major hurricanes that have hit North America. I grew up in South Louisiana, and I lived through Betsy, I lived through Camille, and I lived through Katrina. And put those together, and that was $167 billion worth of damage in an area about the size of the Lower Mainland. And it also resulted in 2,100 and either 76 or 78 corpses, of which I was not one. And that sounds small compared to COVID, but that all happened, all 3 of those storms, the real destructive force took place in a span of about 21 hours. So it was very concentrated, and I was eyewitness to a lot of carnage in a very short time, as well as the recovery that took place a lot longer than 21 hours. So I guess I've just been a witness to carnage.
Well, you know, I mean, it sounds like you've witnessed a lot, so going through it firsthand probably does make you an expert to a certain degree. In terms of the overall pandemic right now, it is a crisis, and we're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And with social distancing and everything, we're able to mitigate it somewhat. And sometimes it feels like maybe things are okay. Are we over the crisis? How do you know when you actually are over the crisis?
Wow, that is a really good question. I don't know that you ever get over it. It just gets different. When you think about Hurricane Katrina, that was 15 years ago. And some of the iconic buildings, some of the iconic people who were part of New Orleans, some of the iconic draws that were part of New Orleans have never come back. Either the people were killed or the places were torn down. And there are whole sections of that town that have not been rebuilt. And it's a relatively small area. So I don't know that you ever get past it or that it ever ends. It just gets different.
Okay. So from that perspective, though, how do we know, how can we know when we're through this? Is it when we have an inoculation, a vaccine for it, or can we start getting to normal sooner?
Well, I do know that the sooner we can turn loose of nostalgia and the sooner we can turn loose of grief over what is not anymore, and we can start working with what is. It's the old maxim of be where your feet are. And where our feet are is right here, right now. And the sooner we can start dealing with that, the better we'll be. I'm certainly not an expert in pandemic, so I don't know if there will be a vaccine. I don't know any of that. And the experts themselves are sort of making it up as they go. But I do know that living through the critical phases of crisis, somehow through that, I developed about 4 principles that have been extremely important to me going through life every time I meet crisis, because this is important. Crises have different faces, but there's a single spine to crisis. It has predictable stages. And in the critical first stages, I like to break it down into 2 phases. There's that scary part, which is the initial phase, and then there's the strong part, which is the recovery stage. And we're just almost getting through that scary stage right now, and that's the one, liken it to a hurricane, where the plywood is coming through the windows at 140 miles an hour. Those sorts of things are where the 4 principles that I'm going to talk about today really come into play.
So we're still in the scary part, you think, but we're moving to what you call the strong part. Yeah. So the scary part is kind of obvious. It's people getting sick, people dying. What is the strong part?
Well, the scary part actually is when you don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
When we just haven't been here before and we don't know what's going to happen. The strong part begins to happen when we start to have some patterns that we're able to recognize. We're starting to understand what it means to live with social distancing. We're starting to understand what it means to be exposed to these threats. And it's starting to have some history. And when it begins to have some history, we're able to put some patterns together, and it starts to be a little less scary. And now that sets us up for what I'm seeing a lot of around Chilliwack today. And that is that a lot of us are getting bored with that high degree of alert that we've been on. And so there's some sloppiness that starts to happen. It's hard for us to stay strong for a long time.
So it's like a little bit of a laissez-faire attitude then, is that what you mean? Like we become used to it almost. We see the numbers every day on the news, people dying every day. We kind of numb to it in a way. And I guess in British Columbia and Chilliwack in particular, we haven't seen a lot of this hit us directly. Mm-hmm. So perhaps that creates a bit of a lackadaisical attitude maybe?
Well, it's hard to stay up by jumping, isn't it? How long can you stay up by jumping? So we get on high alert, and one thing I learned in hurricanes is that anybody can be a hero for about 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, it gets tiring. It just drains you, and you're ready to move on. You can only stay keyed up for so long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's get to your 4 key points then. What did you learn from your past experiences in those 3 hurricanes? And I guess the audience would probably most likely rightly want to know how does that directly impact them, or what maybe they be able to take from that and to apply into this current situation?
Well, again, as I said, all crisis has a single spine. The faces are different, the causes are different, the way it manifests are different, but the way that we adapt to crises and our reactions in those first stages of crises can be very consistent. For instance, the first thing I noticed or I didn't notice it in the first hurricane I was in, but after putting these things together and a pattern developed, first thing I noticed was it's really important to move directly to the things you can control and not to the things that you can't. I've got a maxim for you, Barris. How about this? A problem is not a problem until it's actually a problem.
That sounds like a problem.
Yeah, it's a real problem.
That sounds like a problem.
But until it's manifest, it's just a potential problem.
Right.
And we have enough problems right now that we can stay out of that.
So don't. I think I get what you mean. Like there's so much that's tangible that we need to deal with. Don't think about the possibilities of other things that may or may not even happen. Don't worry about that stuff.
Well, statistically, what is it? 80% of the things we worry about are not going to happen. So that means there's 15 that are enough to worry about, and there's also that unknown number that are going to happen that we're not even aware of yet. So
you got me worried about that 5% that, because I wasn't even thinking about that.
Well, the choice is ours. We can either descend into this morass of the unknown, and we can give into anxiety, which essentially is a vampire that just sucks all the life out of you, or we can go to the place of power, which is the next right thing. What's the next right thing I can do? I like to liken it to, say you're out on a camping trip, and you're camping in the Okanagan in August, and I don't even know if they let you have campfires in August, but let's just pretend that you are, and you start to light your campfire, and you drop your match into a bush. Well, you got 3 choices when that happens. Choice number 1 is you can go into this funk and say, if only I'd gotten more education, I would know better than to do this. If only I'd had a better job, then I probably would have had one of those butane fire starters and not dropped the match. If only I'd done so many things that would have kept me from being here today in this situation, none of this ever would have happened. Or you can start thinking about the horrors in the future. You can start imagining the hectares of land and forest that's going to be destroyed because of what you did, the houses that will be burned down, and all the horror that's to come. Or, Barris, can you think of a better solution, a better action?
Well, if I had a bucket of water, I would just dump it right on that fire right then and there.
Exactly.
Seems
What's
kind of
the
obvious,
next best
right?
thing? Yeah.
So I think what I'm hearing there is, do the obvious things, do the things that are easy, because you're likely to get faster results. And, you know, if there's other things that occur to you along the way, that's great. But, you know, don't wait.
Well,
Act.
the temptation is to get lost in all the things we can't control. What if I lose my job? What if my business goes under? What if this happens? What if that happens? And you can't control those, but you are surrounded by things that you can control. So what's the next best thing? And what I found, sorry.
I was going to say, it also makes you feel good. Like if you are empowering yourself, take control, then you're feeling better about the situation because you're actually doing something constructive to mitigate the disaster or even improve your circumstance.
Yeah. And it compounds. Every little thing you do builds, and you start to have this momentum that gives you at least the illusion of control. And that's the thing that we're trying to get back to.
That's great.
Yeah. And that leads into the second thing, and that is get your information filters firmly fixed. When we were in Hurricane Katrina, every day, or at least every other day, there was some dire prediction that we're all going to die. And you have to remember, there was no power, no electricity, the cell towers were down, nobody was broadcasting. Your reality was what you could see when you stepped outside of a building after that hurricane passed. And so all of these rumors were always taking place. Does that sound familiar? I mean, there's so much out there, so much clickbait, that we have to discipline ourselves to know the difference between information and clickbait. Because you have to remember, a lot of people who are putting things on social platforms and a lot of even news that's out there, those people don't get paid for being right. They get paid for getting looks. They get paid for being clicked on. So I like, again, to keep things simple. If you're lost, get yourself a compass that's credible, that's real. Find yourself 2 or 3 real sources and treat everything else like elevator music. Otherwise, it feeds anxiety.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in all the noise and not know what's right. So that makes sense. So what's number 3?
Number 3, clean your catch basin. Again, I like to keep it simple. When we went to Katrina, that was my wife Karen's first visit to New Orleans, which was quite an introduction. And the day after the hurricane, we went outside just to look around, survey the damage, and I lost sight of her and actually found her over cleaning out a catch basin, which I thought was a very Karen thing to do. She's a Virgo, so she likes things in order. And she's over there shoveling the debris out of this catch basin, and I'm thinking, well, that's great, but what's the use of it? This whole city is underwater. But as soon as she got it cleared, sure enough, there was a vortex. That catch basin actually was still in operation. So she moved to a second one, and by the time she was at a third one, I was helping her. And by the end of the day, our entire parking lot was drained. It was dry.
Well, you know what? I mean, that's such a beautiful story, and I know your wife, and she's resourceful and clever, and so that doesn't surprise me at all. But what it says so many things. What it says is you may not be able to solve the entire situation, but if you can solve even small issues, that's going to help the greater good. And the more little things that you can do, you feel good about that, but also it does improve everyone's situation. And if everyone did that, then things are going to get better.
It builds on itself, again. And it doesn't have to be something huge. Very often it's something small, but it is controllable. And your catch basin may be go outside and take a walk to keep your muscles from atrophying. Do some yoga, do some meditation, something to calm your mind. It can be any of these things that are at hand that can be done. That's clearing a catch basin, and it's also getting ready to avoid some problems in the future.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you this then. What's a catch basin? Just one example, a catch basin that we can clear currently. What might be an example of that for our viewers?
Oh, well, like I said, keeping your health up, that's a really hard one to ask because it's so individual. I think you mentioned last one of our conversations, you mentioned that your family had started playing, what was it, pool?
Oh, no, you're right. Table tennis, ping pong. When the pandemic started, the kids are at home all of a sudden, and they got nothing to do. They're bored. They should be in school. It was before they had figured out the whole school online learning thing. So I went out and ordered from Canadian Tire. I ordered a ping pong table, curbside kind of pickup, and got it home, and that's everyone's a pro now. So it was something that who cares? But it kept them occupied and happy. So just staying entertained and having some sense of normalcy was really important for us.
Online courses, learning things, staying in touch with people, just anything you can do to keep the lines open is cleaning a catch basin, anything that's to hand.
Okay, well, that's good. And what about number 4 now?
The most important in some way, and that is back off. Back off. Because
we've maintained 20 feet of separation. Is that what you're alluding to?
Not really. During Katrina, I keep going back to Katrina, but at one point we found ourselves in a building with 60 strangers. Now this is during the height of the hurricane. No power, again, no information. We didn't know if we were going to live, but we look out the windows and we see the roof and the top floor and the third floor coming off of an apartment building across the parking lot from us. Plywood comes through our window at 140 miles an hour. You don't know what's going on, and there's just this incredible tension. And what I noticed during that day was that these 60 strangers were practicing exaggerated courtesy. With the kind of stress we were under, anything could have set it off. And we're not far from that these days. I mean, if you look at what's happening, we're all jammed into our houses. Some of those restrictions are starting to be lifted, but still, we're jammed into relatively small places, not a lot to do. The poor kids can't go anywhere, maybe out in the backyard and run around in a circle. But there's this pressure of closeness, and there's a whole field of study called territorial psychology that says that can lead to powder keg. And the evidence is already in. I mean, alcohol sales is up 55%. Gun sales were up early on. Marijuana sales are high. I've got a friend that's in a RCMP detachment that said they're having a rise in suicide call-outs. A policeman was in our store yesterday who said that the leaderboard in their detachment is domestic violence calls. So all of this stuff, I mean, marriage family therapists are going to make a fortune after this is over.
Yeah, no doubt.
So it's really important during these times of stress that we practice exaggerated courtesy, and we also put a moratorium on taking offense at little things.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And that makes sense all the time, really. And in this particular time, it probably makes more sense to be aware of that. But don't sweat the small stuff, I think is a key point there.
And again, exaggerate it. I know my wife and I have decided we're not going to play games where we compete against each other. We'll play games where we compete with other people, but we're going to keep down any possibility, since we're both so competitive. We're just going to make sure we skirt that whole issue, and we're being exaggerated in our courtesy, and we're putting a moratorium on taking offense.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful approach to life in general, but particularly now. I think that's great. So anything else you have for us for our premiere episode?
Well, really, just the recognition that this is our time. I mean, our parents had the Depression, they had World War II. This is our crisis, and this is our time to rise and shine and show what we're made of.
Well, good. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for our audience for watching our first episode of The Calm in the Storm. And our next episode is going to be called, Do You Think We'll Ever Shake Hands Again? And I really want to know whether that's the case, whether we will. So thanks very much, Kim. Appreciate you being on the first episode, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Only on chillTV. Thank you.